Good afternoon or morning, depending on where you're located. Welcome to CPSE's sponsored webinar with the IAFF Department Response Capabilities Analysis, from industry standards to workload analysis for the fire department. Today's presenter is Thomas O'Toole, GIS Analyst for the fire and EMS operations at the IAFF. If you have any questions during the webinar, please type them into the chat window in the GoToWebinar panel on your screen. This webinar is being recorded, and you will receive an email with the link to the recording within the next week so you can share it with others. At the end of the webinar, please contact the IAFF directly for additional information, and be sure to visit their booth at the 2024 Excellence Conference, February 27th through March 1st at the Caribe Royale Convention Center in Orlando, Florida. Thanks so much for attending, and now Thomas will begin the webinar.
Thank you, and thank you all for joining this webinar. First off, I know there's a lot of people on this, and that's very good to hear. I just want to say, I hope there are a lot of GIS or data analysts on the webinar that will learn new things and how to evaluate fire department operations, especially if they are unfamiliar with the fire department. So in case you don't work with the fire department directly, hopefully this can give you some insights if you have to do some analysis for them, what you can do for it. If we have GIS analysts that work with the fire department already, I hope this may give you some more ideas and insights of what you can do. And if we have some command staff, such as battalion chiefs or chiefs that have an interest but are not sure how to go about a performance evaluation, I hope this can give you some ideas on how we evaluate performance and how we could possibly help you out. So I can get started here. And okay, who is the IAFF? So the IAFF stands for the International Association of Firefighters. It was founded over 100 years ago. It's a labor organization that represents more than 341,000 full-time professional firefighters and paramedics. So it's up to over 341 now. And again, look at the keywords there. It's full-time professional firefighters. So there's firefighters in the industry that are full-time, it's their full-time job. And then you have the part-timers or people like that, and we represent the full-time people in of the industry. IAFF members serve more than 85% of the population of both the United States and Canada. So the IAFF does represent two countries. So within the IAFF is okay, where do I work? So it's in the Fire and EMS Operations Department. So in the department, we have 10 GIS data analysts and 2 EMS fire specialists. So again, kind of the name is kind of self-serving. It kind of shows what we do is we evaluate fire department staffing and response evaluations. So again, within that, we look at standards of cover, fire department's performance and staffing based on industry standards. And another big thing we can do is evaluate or choose sites for stations. Again, that could be if the city or fire department has ideas for stations, we can evaluate those compared to where stations currently are at, and then we can also use GIS analysis to look at best places to place new fire stations. And in worst case scenarios, if there is some budget crunches within the fire departments, we can evaluate the impact of brownouts, closures, or loss of staffing. Other projects we do in the house here is a big one is EMS integration, which means is if the fire department wants to take on EMS in the transport role and then integrate that into the fire department, we can look at that. And those type of projects and reports are a little bit different from the one I'll be talking about today, is the fire department staffing and response evaluations. And then if the fire department already has integrated EMS into it, we can evaluate the current EMS performance. And then one thing we do more in-house is disaster analysis, because we can identify members that might be impacted by disasters such as hurricanes or wildland fires, and then we can identify if they've been impacted. We know where they live, and we can look at if they've been impacted, and then because the IAFF can provide service for those members that have been impacted by disasters. So from there is what typical things or analysis do we look at for doing a project? And again, let me just backtrack is, again, today I'll be talking about really the fire department staffing and response evaluation portion. So within that is we can do three things. Obviously the GIS, and again, the standards of cover, which I'll be showing in a case study here. Risk assessment and workload analysis using computer-aided dispatch data. So today I'm going to highlight mainly two of these, the GIS and workload. I'm not taking anything away from the risk assessment. It's important. Fire departments should do risk assessments. If they want to get accredited, they have to do a risk assessment. But that's kind of a standalone side of these three. What I hopefully you will get out today is doing the GIS and workload analysis from the CAD data. Is these two kind of marry together really well until an overall will show your overall performance for the fire department. So the GIS Analysis Metrics we use, we talk about and we'll show initial 4-minute travel capabilities, emergency 2-in, 2-out operations, and I'll get into more of that when we show the maps. Second suppression unit that can arrive within 6 minutes travel. BLS, basic life support. This is an EMS response within 4 minutes travel, and ALS, advanced life support transport within 8 minutes of travel. Again, this is if a fire department does EMS in the transport. We'll look at both of those. So it's a 2-tiered response system. And then initial full alarm assignments within 8 or 10 minutes of travel. And these are low hazard, medium hazard, or high hazard occupancies. So where are these coming from? Where's 4, the 6, the 8-minute, and 10-minute responses coming from? Is we use NFPA 1710. So NFPA is the National Fire Protection Association, and really what the NFPA does is it delivers information, knowledge through more than 300 consensus codes and standards, research, training, education, outreach, and advocacy with partnerships. I didn't just come up with that on the top of my head, that came off their website. So in other words, stakeholders across the entire fire industry participate to develop the codes and standards. So we're using, again, industry standards that are been developed across stakeholders across the entire fire industry. So again, there's 300 of them. We're using, I'm going to be talking about one specifically here, NFPA 1710. NFPA 1710 is the standard for the organization and deployment of fire suppression operations, emergency medical operations, and special operations to the public by career fire departments. That's a big mouthful. The nice thing about 1710 is we can evaluate fire departments of all sizes over 2 countries on the same terms. So, and we do this. We've done projects for departments the size of New York City or Toronto, Ontario, all the way down to the single station fire departments in some small little towns. So again, we evaluate these all on the same metrics outlined in NFPA 1710. So now for folks that may be on this webinar, is you may be looking at accreditation, so you can look at your own internal evaluation. You may have your own target metrics. So you can still use the GIS and CAD data similar to what I will show today. However, if you want to ask the IAFF for assistance, we will always use the NFPA 1710 for the performance metrics because this is the industry-wide standard. Okay. So we do need some setup and data to set up, to do the analysis. First of all, on the GIS side, is you need a street network. Obviously, if you work for a GIS department, if your GIS department has built a street network for your town or whatever response area for a fire department, that's fantastic. You can use that. We can't always get that, so we're lucky enough to we just use Esri Street Map Premium Road Network because we can get that for both the United States and Canada. And the nice thing about that is it has historical traffic speeds already built into it. So it's nice we usually set the terms for Wednesday at 5:00 p.m. that's when most people are out working, and that's the time when people might be getting off work and picking up kids from school activities. So that's when the most congestion might be happening in the city. So we're constricting maybe the response coverage is down for the worst case scenario for a fire department because there might be more traffic out on the road. Second thing we need is a response boundary or boundaries of the fire department's responses jurisdictions. So I say boundaries because sometimes we can get fire department can have a different fire response boundary and a different EMS response boundary if they do EMS. So we use the boundaries because we just calculate the percentage of roads that are covered within the response boundary. So we're looking at that 4, 6, 8, 10-minute time frame as we just look at the percentage of roads you can cover within those time frames by the overall amount of roads you have within the response boundary. And then we need the station and staffing information. So obviously, yes, you need the stations and where they're located, but also we want the detailed staffing information of how each station is staffed. So let's say, for example, station 1 might have engine 1 in it, it's staffed with 3 firefighters, might have ladder 1 staffed with 3 firefighters, might have medic 1 staffed with 3 firefighters and a battalion chief. So we would need all that information for each type of, for each station in the fire department. And then coming over to the workload analysis is we use CAD data, the computer-aided dispatch data. So we do rely on the locals or even through them, maybe the fire department personnel, such as the fire chiefs, to get this type of information to us. If we can't get it or they can't get it, we just can't do the workload. But more often than not, we are getting CAD data. And what we usually ask for as a minimum here is 5 years of data. So that way we can look at trends. And in case we're looking at any projections, we can project out based on 5 years of data. And we do that a lot for especially EMS integrations. We need the incident ID, and then all the units deployed to the incident. So a breakdown of, like, you might have the same record of incident IDs. If, like, let's say 3 apparatus responded to one incident, we would need 3 records of that same incident of all those apparatus that were deployed, and a breakdown of each unit's timestamps. So the timestamps would include the date and the times of, and then we would need those for each individual apparatus. So we can always, we're getting the most detailed analysis of each apparatus that went in and what their travel times were, et cetera, et cetera. And then we can also, we need the type of incident. So we can, and that can be as granular as we want. You can just, keep it as just between fire and EMS incidents, but you can break those down into more subcategories if needed. Depends on what the data shows in the CAD RMS system. And then obviously the address or coordinates of the incident, so we know where they're going. And then from there you can build heat maps and the GIS to know where most of the incidents are occurring. And then if the department can actually hit the targeted response coverages, and if they're hitting those areas of high concentration. Okay, so now we're going to get to the meat and potatoes and finally look at some maps. Again, this was a case study I'm going to show for today for Detroit, Michigan. So we did both standards of cover and a workload assessment for Detroit. To give you a little background, Detroit, it has 36 stations. It's about approximately 143 square miles. So it is a very large geographic area in size for a city. And it has approximately 600,000 people. And that was according to the latest 2021 census information. So what I'm showing here first is the 4-minute response coverage and 2 in, 2 out. And I'll get to the 2 in, 2 out here in the next slide. But what we're showing here is, okay, what's the 4-minute response? Again, now we're making the assumption that every unit's available to respond upon dispatch in ready to go in every fire station. So that kind of gives your baseline for the fire department of, okay, what's their 4-minute response of travel? And then sliding over here to the left here in the map on the right is actually what recommendations we showed. So we actually did recommend and use GIS to show where new fire stations should go. So that would show on the change in 4-minute coverage. Again, you can do this if you are looking at any of your own proposals internally for your fire department or accreditation or whatever is. Again, these are easy maps to do. And probably the first map you almost want to do is look at your 4-minute coverage. And 2 in, 2 out, which is an OSHA. OSHA is the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, so they have different standard guidelines and rules. So 2 in, 2 out means once firefighters come on the scene of a fire, you need 2 firefighters on a hose line to perform interior attack operations, but before they can enter the building, you need 2 people back up in reserve in case the firefighters going into the structure get in trouble and they need help or rescue. So they can't enter until 2 other firefighters are in back and ready to go. And then you'll see in this picture here, there's actually 5 firefighters because you have one firefighter as the pumper operator on the engine, but we look at emergency 2 in, 2 out. So worst case is you might have to abandon the pump operation and just, be that second person is the backup. So Detroit, coming back here, they staff all their engines, ladders, and their heavy rescues with 4 firefighters. So their 2 in, 2 out is the same as their 4-minute coverage. But a lot of fire departments may only staff engines or ladders with 3, so you'd have to wait for that second arriving apparatus. So in GIS analysis, you may have to do that. You might have to count up at least 4 firefighters by looking at multiple apparatus that would arrive. So, but for Detroit, it was easy because it's just the same. Next is they do have EMS within their fire department. So this was looking at their BLS medic units and where they're stationed, and then again, their 4-minute coverage. And why 4-minute for EMS? It's the same as fire, according to the NFPA standard. The initial unit arriving on scene should arrive within 4 minutes of travel for either a fire or an EMS incident. So again, the times are the same for either fire or EMS. And again, we looked at the 4-minute coverage. And again, overall, Detroit, especially on the 4-minute for everything, has pretty good response coverage for a city this size. They don't have as many medic units compared to obviously engines. They're in every station, so there's a little bit lower coverage. I don't have the percentage of road coverages in front of me right now, but as you can see, is what we recommended is they need medic units in every station, and including the new stations we recommended. So this is kind of the harbinger of what's going to be coming. Probably what you can probably be thinking of is what's going to be shown in the workload analysis with the medic units. Next thing, okay, this is a picture of the 2-tiered medic system. So BLS unit, again, would arrive with 4 minutes of travel response first, and that would usually be an engine because firefighters on engines you can be trained to a BLS level of pre-hospital care. Then your medic unit could be the fire department unit or even a private industry medic unit. Again, with the paramedics, should arrive within 8 minutes of travel. So again, that's that 2-tiered system. You get a first arriving, BLS people on scene. They can at least start treating the patient in need, and then when the ALS people with higher level of certificational care and then providing the transport can get there a little bit later, can get there within 8 minutes. So it's a 2-tiered system because usually there's an engine in every fire station, and then there's less medic units. They're usually roaming around, but you still want that target of 8 minutes of travel response. Okay, next is we're looking at the 6-minute second due road coverage for Detroit. And again, this is very good because they're really well equipped for fires. They have engines in every station, ladders in almost every station, and what they call tactical mobile squad, their heavy rescue units in several stations too. So getting a second due arrival within 6 minutes is, again, they have very good road coverage. So looking at their 4 and their 6, again, it's showing that a city this size with this many stations they're well equipped to respond to fires. Again, it gets better if they had a few new stations because we recommended obviously staff them all with engines at least, and then I think a ladder up in station 2, so they could increase coverage. Obviously, if you get more stations with more staff and apparatus. Now we're coming into the NFPA's low, medium, and high hazard alarms within 8 minutes of coverage. This is how I want to say is like more of a depth of coverage because this is assembling the number of firefighters that can arrive within 8 minutes. So obviously they're coming from this fire station. So if you want to look at this type of analysis, this is why it's critical to look at, you need to know the breakdown of how each apparatus is staffed in every fire station, so then you can count up the number of firefighters. So NFPA says low hazard alarm should have 17 firefighters within 8 minutes, and again, by doing that analysis, and Detroit has really good coverage. I mean, that's actually pretty exceptional for a city this size because again, they staff their fire apparatus with 4 firefighters, and then it would drop below it. So and again, so you can assemble a lot of firefighters within 8 minutes. Now, people that might be unfamiliar with NFPA or what's a low hazard alarm is NFPA 1710 does break down, the type that the firefighters that should be at a low hazard alarm. So it's not just a random 17 firefighters show up and who does what. Is they do a breakdown of like who would be doing what. So you have the command staff, you have a pump operator, primary backup lines, and then your usually staff from ladders or aerials is you have the search and rescue people and one person controlling the aerial device. And you have to have your rapid intervention crew. So these are your backup people in case people get in trouble within the structure fire. And again, so what's a low hazard alarm? What's a structure that's a low hazard? So NFPA 1710 states that's a 2,000 square foot dwelling without any exposures. So these are pictures taken from Detroit. This is a 2,000 square, basically a 2,000 square foot house. So according to NFPA 1710, to meet the, staffing objective is you would need 17 firefighters to fight the fire safely and effectively on a structure this size. Getting onto the medium hazard, now we're still at the 8-minute road coverage or response travel time. 26 or 28 firefighters here that's on conditions if the fire department has EMS within the system. So again, we're counting the firefighters that are in the fire department. So if the fire department does EMS and would have the transport within their own system, they would count up to 28 firefighters. If they do not, they would only count up to 26 firefighters. So Detroit does, so we count up to 28. Because now the medium and high hazard is you'll have designated medic units in an ambulance standing by for obviously medical emergencies. So medic units are now counted within this count. And again, it's harder for cities to obviously reach 28 firefighters. Bigger cities can, but obviously the coverage can shrink down because that's getting to be a pretty good high count to count up to this many firefighters within 8 minutes. But again, Detroit still does a pretty good job of it overall. And again, based on our recommendations, we actually recommended they staff everything up to 5 firefighters. And so if they did that, even with the new stations, is they could really have very good medium hazard coverage. And again, here's a breakdown of a medium hazard. This is a picture of like a garden level or 3-story apartment, or medium hazards again could be like open air strip malls or your typical 3-story apartments or condos. That's kind of how NFPA 1710 lays it out. And again, so here's the breakdown of how they lay out who the staffing would be and what their operations would be at the scene of the fire. And then, but in Detroit, we showed a house because this is a house bigger than 2,000 square feet, but it also has exposures. These type of houses are like a dime a dozen in Detroit. So again, to fight this type of house fire, our fire in a house this size is, again, to meet the standard to be safe and efficient, is you would need 28 firefighters on scene within 8 minutes. And next we have the high hazard, but this now jumps up to 10 minutes and 10 seconds. And then this is either 39 or 43 firefighters. Again, the difference is in the EMS portion. If the fire department has the EMS people, then it would count as 43. If they do not, it would drop to 39 because now there's 4 designated EMS personnel that would count in this staffing. So again, high hazard, now this jumps to a 10-minute, 10 seconds instead of 8 minutes. And again, so the coverage here is really, again, quite good for a city like the size of Detroit. And obviously based on our recommendations, it could be obviously better if you're adding more staff and more fire stations. And a high hazard, again, is a breakdown of, according to NFPA 1710, of who the personnel should be and what their functions would be at the scene of the fire. And obviously, in the picture here, boy, actually, there's a lot of cracks on this building besides the fire. So I don't know if that was a scene commander, I would just probably tell everyone to evacuate because the building's going to fall down. But anyways, and again, what's a high hazard? It's usually we're talking about high rises, but it can also involve very large buildings that are maybe not high rises, but take up a lot of square footages, like your common box stores, or like Amazon distribution centers or something like that. They could be considered high hazard occupancies too. Okay, so before I get into the workload analysis, it's kind of the halfway point here. I just want to stop and see if there's any questions.
We got one. So how are you developing the 17 firefighter in 8-minute coverage? Can you go over the steps you take to develop that layer?
I could, that's kind of the meat and potatoes of GIS. I could, if someone wants to contact me offline, we can get into those steps. Is really what you have to do is you have to know the fire station data, put that in your GIS fire station level, layer. You build out response areas for 4, 6, 8 minutes, and you connect that fire station, the fire station to those response areas, and then you just union all that together and count up to how you get to 17 firefighters or 28 firefighters or 43 firefighters. That's kind of it in a nutshell. It's really quick, but if you want more detail on that, just shoot me offline. We can walk through it.
Okay, and another one came in. Where is including single-family dwellings as medium hazards discussed? Is this AHJ discretion?
It could be. So the low hazard is 17 is 2,000 square feet, but modern day homes, as we know, are probably never built as 2,000 square feet. So any home that's going to be built nowadays bigger than 2,000 square feet, that could be considered a medium hazard, because now you might have like multiple floors, basements, you might have exposures. So that would lop that automatically over into the medium hazard. And then there is a breakdown of like square footage size, I believe, in the medium hazard in NFPA 1710. They talk about like those garden style apartments or like open air shopping centers. I think that's when they made the last version of the standards what they were thinking about. But homes, big homes like big mansions we consider that here too as being a medium hazard. And then I don't know if they're going to revise and look back on that next time they update the standard here in a few years. So that might be one of the things they look at. Anything else?
Nope.
Okay. So now we're going to get into the workload analysis based off the CAD data, again, from Detroit. So now we're looking, so we look linearly at the maps and, what your coverage is, across the response jurisdiction. Now, if you can get into the in-depth of coverage of your, using your CAD or CAD RMS data, whatever you want to use, is now we can look at the overall performance of how the units are performing. So the first thing you can do is look at just the unit responses, number of units responses and the number of incidents that occurred. I didn't obviously show the whole report and like all the dashboards. I pulled certain just of these charts out just to show on this webinar today. But again, we have this, set up with some filters you can use. So let's just look at 1 year. Let's look at the last year here. So the unit responses, because they have so many, so I'll have to scroll down here. As you can see, the medic units by far respond to the most incidents, and that's quite common within the fire department. Usually there's a ratio between 70% EMS calls to 30% fire calls, or it could range up to like maybe 90% EMS to 20 or 10% fire. And Detroit was somewhere around like the 80-20 ratio, which is very common. But one thing is when they do respond to fires is they're responding to structure fires. Detroit has historically always had a high volume of structure fires, and that's why they're so well equipped and staffed to deal with fires. But as you can see, most of their calls are going to EMS. And even if you're not, maybe not sure, is so the most busiest unit responded to over 8,000 calls in 1 year. So if you're unfamiliar with fire department operations, is like, well, is that a lot? Well, yeah, that's quite a lot. That's extremely high call volume for one unit. So these top 11 units responded to over 7,000 calls just in 1 year. So these guys are getting rocked pretty good. Everyone's busy in Detroit. It's just a very high call volume city. even coming down here to the medic units, or excuse me, the engines and trucks and heavy rescues, I mean, they're still getting high call volume too. I mean, look at this, engine 17 still respond almost 2,000 calls a year. So even though on the chart it might look a little deceiving, but they respond to a lot. But what's glaringly obvious here is the medic units were responding to a lot more calls than the fire apparatus. So these are things, once you start pulling out this information, is things you might have to start looking at. This is another chart, just pulling out, just looking at the medic units and the type of calls they were responding to. So this is a priority dispatch type of information Detroit uses. So that looks at a Alpha Bravo Charlie Delta Echo type call. So the Charlie Delta Echo calls are usually the higher priority calls to look at. And so that could be like major trauma, strokes, heart attacks, cardiac arrest. So these were, yes, lights and sirens are going to respond to these type of calls, and more often than not, probably almost 100% of the time is yes, they're going to transport someone to the hospital. So again, looking at just the year 2022 here is the highest, over 2,000 calls for Medic 17B here were for these higher priority calls. So that's again a very high number just in itself of the type of calls that the medic units were responding to. And then now we're going to look at UHU. So what is UHU? UHU stands for unit hour utilization, which is it's used to estimate the number of frontline ambulances needed to provide patient transportation. It was kind of designed as a measure of productivity, but now it's been kind of turned into a useful tool to estimate the number of ambulances needed to manage demand. So how we use it here in Detroit is 1 hour, a 1 unit hour is equal to 1 hour of service by a fully equipped and staffed ambulance ready for dispatch. So utilization is a measure of productivity is how we use it, which compares the number of resources, unit hours, to the actual amount of time on task, including treatment and transport. So if I scroll down here, you'll see the baseline is how we're recommending where the UHU should be for units is at 0.3. So if you want to think of this range on this chart goes from 0 to 1, and this is, think of this as your time you have on your total shift. It's meaning that could be a 12-hour, 24-hour shift, doesn't matter. So you want to say 30% of your time on shift is actual responding to calls and then providing any transport if needed. Is because, well, why is it only 30%? So you might think that's quite low. Well, ask any fire department official or EMS or paramedic person is like, well, there's a lot more we do during a shift, and we just don't sit around and wait for calls. That's what everyone maybe thinks in the general world, but no, they have a lot of activities they have to do within their shift. Is they have to maybe clean and restock the ambulance. There's training they have to do. There's meetings they have to maybe have. They have to eat. They, have to take a break for a bathroom. I mean, there's just everything that you would think of in a normal day. Is a lot of that stuff is also being done on a shift at a fire department. So that's why we kind of say that kind of the it kind of fluctuates. We talk about some pay for 0.3 to 0.4 is that happy area where you should have your UHU. And again, you can see the medic units are way above that. So they're close to almost 1 here in the busiest units, which means these guys aren't getting any rest. They're just turning around and going one to another call. So they, once they're free and cleared from one call, they're just going to another call. And again, this is a really good evaluation for unit performance for EMS within the fire department and how busy the units are. And again, we look at here, we made a kind of a little staffing calculator is, I think Detroit has now up to 22 medic units. So this is where their this is just overall performance, not broken down by the units. So this is just looking at the fire department as a whole. And again, their UHU is quite high, and it's almost close to 1, which is ridiculously high. So we built this calculator, and you can plug in how many units they really need. So to get down close to that 0.3, 0.35 range, is they would actually need 60 medic units on every shift. So again, these are things you can create, ideas you can do for your own evaluation. Especially if you do EMS within your fire department, is you can try to make these type of calculations to really see where you need to be. And then travel times. Well, obviously, if you can look at and analyze your CAD data, the first thing you want to look at is travel times, because I mean, I think every fire official and maybe even city officials want to know what's your travel times. I mean, how fast can you get somewhere? So again, we look at the 90th percentile instead of the average. The reason being is NFPA 1710 says the first arriving apparatus should arrive within 4 minutes 90% of the time. So the 90% of the time equals to the 90th percentile. So again, and then we break this down by seconds, because that's what 1710 does, and actually every second counts anyways in the fire response. So it's actually more granular to go down by the seconds than it is by the minutes anyways. But again, you can see the medic units have a very large high response or travel time compared to the fire apparatus, which again are still high, and comparing it to the NFPA 1710, and they're very, very high. So again, if you are kind of doing your own internal performance or evaluation or looking at accreditations, you can set your own performance metrics. So again, you can create a chart like this and just set where you want your own threshold to be, and then just look at compare it to where your actual units are, what they're doing. But again, the picture coming out here is when you usually do an evaluation, is you're going to see a story coming out of what's going on. So again, the medic units, they're very busy. They're going everywhere all the time because there's so many EMS calls, and then now their travel times are quite high. So again, it means they're lacking the number of resources they really need. Actually, the fire apparatus are too. We actually recommended in this project to add a couple engines too, because the engines are very, very busy too. Here's another way to look at this chart. Again, it's kind of a ratio. Let me get to one here again. So this is a ratio of how many times each unit met the standard of NFPA 1710's travel to did not meet the standard. So obviously this ratio goes from 0 to 100, so it's taking account of all the calls that each unit made, but then how often so it did or did not meet the standard. So in this example, Medic 27B met the travel time standard on 19.4% of the time it made responses, and then it did not meet the standard on 80.6% of the time it went on responses. So again, this ratio is kind of a good way to look at whatever your benchmark is. Now we say we're going to look at NFPA 1710, but you can, if you want to set your own benchmark and build a chart like this, it's very useful. It's like, okay, well, how often, or where are units at? How are they performing compared to what we want them to perform at? So this is a very good chart to build. And again, for Detroit, the medic units were having a hard time ever meeting the standard because, again, their travel times are so long, as you saw in the previous chart. It gets a little bit better for the fire apparatus, and actually you can see ladder 21 here made it 100% of the time. But again, also take into account how often some of these units responded, because we can take into account reserve apparatus that, actually ladder 21 in 2022 only went on one call. So it met the standard. It traveled under 4 minutes that one time, so it met the standard 100% of the time. So you have to take into account how many times these units were actually traveling, or responding calls too. But again, you can see it's a good chart to look at, so you can look at how often, or how good your units are performing based on the standards you set. One thing we do kind of internally, it's not based on any standard, but we look at back-to-back responses. So a back-to-back response is what we consider anything from within 10 minutes. So when a unit is cleared, it's available for dispatch. And then so when you go from clear to being dispatched again, we say anything within 10 minutes of that time frame would be a back-to-back response. And then we just kind of build bins within 2-minute intervals of how often that occurred. And again, this is department-wide, not broken down by any specific units, but you could do it that way if you want. And you can see there, this is a very high volume of units that were being called back to back. So even there's I'll look at 2022 again. I have that up. So over 1,400 calls, were dispatched before a unit was cleared. So that's just showing there's a waiting list in the queue for apparatus to become available to respond to the next call. And then most happen within that 0 to 2 minute time frame. So again, that's very, very short amount of time. That gives your firefighters, paramedics no break. They're just turning around, going from one incident to another. So again, these are kind of like glaring numbers you have to look at. Then we did look at the percentage now by unit of percentage of how many calls that they were in back-to-back compared to their overall number of calls they responded to. And so the highest ones is like here, Medic 10A. So that responded, so they had over 2,000 calls were considered back-to-back by us, and that was 44% too of their calls. So that's a very high number again too, is like close to 50% of the time is like these guys are just turning around and going on another call right away. So again, this leads to attrition, this leads to burnout. This is really taxing on the firefighter paramedics within Detroit. And again, you can see the medic units had the most back-to-back calls. Again, this makes sense because most of the calls are for medic incidents that occur within the city. But it even occurred, even the numbers are even high for fire apparatus, if you really think about it. So, okay. So I want to take a little bit of time. So that was just highlighting specific things in Detroit, which, kind of told the story. Is like, oh boy, they were really taxed. They're really overworked. Their medic units are getting, they're just getting bombarded. It just shows a need that fire department needs more medic units to handle the call volume that they're operating with. So again, once you look at your metrics of your GIS side of things, look at your standards of cover, also look at the workload. If you can get the CAD data, because all of that together is going to show you, it's going to just give you a good story of your overall evaluation of your fire department. Because just the maps alone doesn't really tell you how busy units are, how well they're performing, how well, how often they have to go somewhere, are they meeting, whatever standard it is or performance metric it is on travel times, what type of calls are they going to. So it's a very good, if you kind of merge those together, it's going to tell you a good story of your overall department operations. So this one, I just want to show one other thing that wasn't in Detroit. Again, this was a separate project for Dearborn, Michigan, which is ironically right next to Detroit, but it was made by one of our analysts. Again, you can make your own dashboards to your heart's content. She just, showed this similar stuff in a different way, but then, we get more granular on like, the calls and responses and how they off, by year, by month, even by the time of day and the day of the week. Like, so most of your call volume occurs, Monday through Friday, during the daylight hours when people are out and about and working. That's when most of the population's up and about. You can, create a bubble chart here of like, what's the most type of calls you're responding to. Obviously in Dearborn and probably most fire departments can be an EMS call. Again, you can see that ratio from EMS to everything else over here. It could be in that 70-30, 80-20 ratio, and again, she made some other things here of like, the responses by the station, when were they the busiest, and then the average time on service units, or how many, what's the average time on service from when they're dispatched to when they're cleared, and like when's the busiest time of the day and how long has it took. So she, made a chart like that. But one thing I do want to highlight down here is if your fire department has first due response areas, which means is like a designated area that each fire station has, and that whatever call happens within that area, that corresponding fire station will respond first to that call, is that's a very good analysis to look at too. I mean, you'd have to build those polygons in GIS and then count the incidents that happen in each polygon. But from that, you can take information as like who's traveling where, how often, and why. So what we call like a cover incident, which means if I'm medic 1, I respond to an incident within my own first due response area. Another call comes in, there's no one else available to take it, so maybe medic 2 from station 2 has to come into my response area and can cover that call, which means there's a delayed response because there's an increased travel time for a unit coming farther away to respond to that incident, which means, okay, how often is that happening? So the best way you can show is like a table like right here is if you're traveling from station 1, where were they going, excluding their own, obviously, their first due areas. So out of boundary might be like on a mutual aid call outside of town. This, they went to those units from station 1 went to station 2, high amount of time, but they also went to station 4 even more. And you're going to see, further down the road here that station 3 also went to station 4's area high amount of time. So again, you can get some glances of what's going on and what units are going where and what some specific geographic area in the response jurisdiction and why. So this chart here may look confusing, but it's actually quite kind of fun to read. So again, remember I targeted station 4, so I highlight station 4. Now we're looking at the top of the remaining stations who came in the most. So station 1 came in with over 2,600 times, and then what's the reason? Down here, she broke it down. This will highlight. It's not going to. Okay, so great. So these are breakdowns of the type of calls of what they're responding to into that other first due response. And so, these units are coming in and responding to EMS calls the most often. So this can give you a glance of maybe like, okay, do we need more units in service at a specific fire station? Maybe station 4 needs 2 medic units instead of just 1 medic unit. So again, these are, once you evaluate your performance, is you can look at, you can draw conclusions of like, do we have the appropriate number of staff? Do we have an appropriate number of apparatus? Obviously on the GIS side, you can look at, do we need more fire stations? Should we redistribute our fire stations? And of course, that's not going to happen overnight, but again, something to consider as a long-term look at overall performance. So, okay, so that kind of just draws up the conclusion here. I just want to again thank you all for taking your time to listen to this webinar. Please take my email and shoot me any questions if you have any after we're done here. We'll take some time here for some questions, but you can also email me if you want. If there are any IAFF members or command staff that would be interested in our help, please reach out to your local president and contact the IAFF. We can get this process started to do a project for your fire department. Again, we only deal with IAFF members, but again, so if you're like a chief or a battalion chief, again, if you want to work with your local affiliate, go right ahead, and you're welcome to still be on these projects. That's fine by us, but again, just go through your local and we can help you out. So again, just to wrap this up before we take any questions, I hope, looking at both GIS side and a workload side, looking at your CAD, you can look at, you can draw some good conclusions from what your fire department performance is. So that wraps it up for me. So again, I can take any questions here while we're still at time.
Okay, so nothing is coming in as of right this minute. Does anybody, thank you, Thomas. If possible, can we be sent this presentation? So yeah, within the next week, probably just a few days, you'll all get an email with the link to this recording so you can share it. And we're also going to include the link that's at the top of the toolbar here on his screen. That's just to this slide deck. So you'll get that in the email as well, so you can use that as well. And let's see. Thank you, Tom, IAFF Local 1583, Biloxi, Mississippi. Thanks. Thank you. What software program did your analyst use to create the dashboard that was displayed?
So we actually have two. We use, so this one right first is ArcGIS Insights. So this is the Esri product. And then we also use Tableau, which is not an Esri product, but it's a very good software program for looking at analyzing data. So we have the choice to use one or the other. It's up to the analyst which one we want to use. They both have pros and cons over each other. You can kind of tell now we put reports into ArcGIS story maps, so embedding like insights is a little bit easier. This is my personal opinion when I'm getting into this. So using insights is a lot easier, obviously, to embed into an Esri product into an Esri product, but Tableau is a little more robust and to do the workload analysis. But there's other programs you can use out there, and there's many. But so it's either Insights for us or Tableau.
Okay. Local 754 says thank you. And somebody wants to know, can you give a cost estimate?
Oh, very good question. I forgot to say that in the conclusion. So IAFF members are member paying due. They pay their dues to the IAFF. So this does not cost anything. This is free. So any project or report we do for you will not cost you anything.
He says thank you. All right. That seems to be the end of the questions. Of course, Tom, why don't you put your contact last slide up again, and people can write down your email address so they can contact you. And
yes.
You'll also get it in the email. So if you don't have a pen and paper right now. So thank you all so much for attending. Thomas, thank you so much. It was very informative. And we look forward to seeing everybody in Orlando, February 27th through March 1st. Before we know it.
Thank you.
All right. Well, we'll wrap it up and give everybody back a little bit more of their day. Have a great day. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you all.